My name is Rich, and I'm an alcoholic. Thanks to you guys and the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, my sobriety date is 7/10/2011. Before we get started, is there anybody in here with under 30 days? All right, we're glad you're here. Glad you're here. I have some really good news and some really bad news. The good news is there is a solution. The bad news is take a look around because we're it. So I'm up here to explain and share what it was like, because I didn't come here willingly, what happened, and what's it like now. So in the big book, it shares that in the drinking of every alcoholic, we pass into a state where the most powerful desire to stop is of absolutely no avail. For this tragic situation has occurred long before it is suspected. I can't share with you when I drank the beer with the red X on it. And I can't share with you when I became an alcoholic. All I can share with you is I crossed that line, and once I took a drink, the drink took me. So through that process, I can share with you this, that my disease took me farther than I wanted to go. It kept me longer than I wanted to stay, and it cost me more than I wanted to pay. In the big book, it shares with us that men and women drink essentially because we like the effect produced by alcohol. That's why I drank. I liked the way it made me feel. Even though we admit it is injurious, we cannot differentiate the true from the false. Our alcoholic life becomes the only normal one. And so this is what I was going to share with you. So prior to me coming to these rooms, I was living in a house in Plano. I'm living in one end of the house. My wife is living in the other end of the house. My dad and I was paying my rent. I don't have a job. I don't have a car. We have no electricity. I'm getting food from the church. I'm contemplating suicide, but I think my life is normal. That's where my disease took me. And like I shared with you, that I didn't come here willingly. But how I got here it was in February of 2011. My daughter, who was at the University of Alabama, made a phone call to a gentleman that I previously owned part of a company with. His name is Danny, and a lot of you guys know him. And she called Danny and says, "Danny, you need to help my dad. He's dying from his drinking." And Danny's like, "Well, Caitlin, what do you want me to do about this?" And so one day, wasn't previous to this knowledge, one day Danny had called me out of the blue. I had resigned from the company that I owned part of 5 years previous to this. That's what a good alcoholic does, right? They came to me and says, "We're kind of a little concerned about your drinking." I'm like, "I'll show you. I'll resign." That's what I did. And through that process, I continued to withdraw a 401k plan, lose a house, lose a car, lose everything I had. And that's how I got to Plano, where my dad was paying my rent. So Danny called me one day out of the blue and says, "Hey, Rich, man, let's go grab a sandwich." I'm like, "All right, sounds good." And we get to the Subway over there off of Hedgecox and Allman. He's like, "Hey, why don't we pick your wife up a sandwich?" I'm like, "Uh-oh, this isn't going good." I'm like, "Why do you want to get her a sandwich?" So we got my wife a sandwich. We proceeded to go back to my house, and they did an intervention on me in my garage. Now, this wasn't the first time I was approached that I had a drinking problem, but at this point in time, something had changed, because it seems that I was at wit's end. Because when they approached me and going to a treatment center, I said yes. And actually, my wife thought I said no. So she started beating the shit out of me in the garage. But Danny's like, "Stop, Kathy." He said yes. So through that process, I had set up some time, and through the grace of God, which was amazing, as a good alcoholic, what I did is I started interviewing treatment centers, because I wanted to make sure I found the right treatment center for me. Because I had to wait 45 days. Danny reemployed me as an employee, and I had 45 days before the insurance kicked in. So I went to this fine resort in Princeton, Texas. It was called Karen at the time. I went out there and did a tour. It's kind of nice. They had a pool, a gymnasium, and all these things. And I went to one in Van Alstyne. I went to one in Austin. And here's the deal. When I went to my insurance company, they go, "You can go to any treatment center you want, but the one in Princeton," because it was a non-for-profit, and it was $31,000. And 3 days later, I get a call from Karen Treatment Center that said, "Rich, you know what? If you're still willing to come out here, we actually have one bed that's reserved for Collin County resident, and we'll give it to you for $5,000. So Danny cut a check, and I proceeded to go on I had like 11 days. We picked the day and the time I was going to go there, so I had 11 days to prepare for this process, which wasn't good by any means, and conceded to try to put everything I did for 38 years all into 4 days, right? And so I remember my daughter dropping me off, drinking beer all the way up to the doorstep, and she says, "Get out," and she goes, "I hope you enjoy. That's your last beer." So I went inside the treatment center and got admitted in, and I wake up 3 days later. I'm in this detox room, and they're feeding me this medicine, and I'm really groggy, and I can't really recall the first 3 days there. And I says, "I don't want any more of that medicine." They go, "Well, Rich, you don't understand. That medicine's not for you. That's for us, because you're an asshole." So I'm not sure what I did for those first 3 days, but what I can assure you is the staff was not impressed with my qualities and my behavior. So it's funny how an alcoholic starts thinking. So this process goes on, and then I'm starting to take a shower. I'm eating 3 square meals, and at day 7, I have this like aha moment. I'm like, did I really make the right decision? Am I really an alcoholic? I'm not like these people in here. So I decided to go back and see my counselor. His name was Will. I said, "Hey, Will, you know what? I think it's time for me to go. I'm not like these people in here." And he assured me this. He said, "Rich, if I had $1 for every patient that came to me and said that at day 7, guess what? I wouldn't be working here." And he says, "I want you to do me a small favor. I want you to call your mother." I'm like, "Dude, my parents live in Iowa. I'm 49 years old. You don't need to drag my parents into this thing." So on day 10, I called my mother. I said, "Hey, Mom, I'm in a treatment center." She said, "You should have went right out of high school." That was her first words. The craziest thing happened. In the big book, it shares with us that, it said we had to concede to our innermost self that we're truly alcoholics. At that moment in time, I went back to my room, and I started writing down all the consequences and circumstances that I'd suffered through my life. I started drinking when I was 13, and I'd been in jail several times. And I could associate every consequence and all the trials and tribulations, I could associate that with drinking and drugging. I didn't get in trouble every time I went out, drinking. But every time I was in trouble, guess what? I was drinking. So at that moment in time, I conceded to my innermost self that I truly was an alcoholic. This is the first step of recovery. The delusion that we are like normal people must be smashed. Through this process, then we go on, and then it says, came to believe in a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Here's the funniest thing that happened to me is, as I quit drinking and I get out of treatment and my life got worse. I got all the side effects, of like you get from medication. I got what they call RIDS. I became restless, irritable, and discontent. Every day of my life was miserable. My life was getting worse. It wasn't getting better. I remember me and Will arguing in his office. He's like, "Rich, that drinking isn't your problem." I'm like, "Dude, you don't know me. I drink, I go to jail." He goes, "Dude, you're the problem. Drinking was your solution." And it took me a long time to digest through that. For the funniest thing that I learned is, as prior going into the treatment, I'm pulling this locomotive of circumstances. I had several warrants, federal tax liens, civil judgments. And so I get out of treatment, and I'm coming home and I'm expecting this ticker tape parade, wow, I've been sober for 31 days, And I walk in the house, and I think my wife thought I was going to come fluttering in with angel wings on and a halo, and that just wasn't the case. And on day 2, she said, "I'm out of here." She says, "I don't even like you sober." And the saving grace behind that was, and I can share with you this, is 7/25 of 2011, I got a sponsor before I got out of treatment because they suggested I get a sponsor. And so I went to this man, his name's Jim Gardner. I said, "Hey, Jim," I go, "will you be my temporary sponsor?" He goes, "Rich, are you willing to go to any lengths to get this thing?" I'm like, "Well, dude, I'm in a treatment center. What do you expect me to say, no?" I'm like, "Sure, I'm willing to go to any lengths." And in my story, you'll hear, because he used that against me to keep me moving forward through this process. But when I got out, I shared with you that I didn't have a car, but my daughter had a car, and she came back from the University of Alabama so she could watch her dad. So she was probably the mediator between me and my wife early in sobriety. So my wife left for 7 days down to the in-laws in Granbury and then came back. And so our relationship didn't change for a really long time. But what God had done for me through this process is I had to take my daughter to college every morning, go to the office, go pick her up at noon, go back home, take her off, and then go back to the office. So through this 6 months, I had an opportunity to build a relationship with my daughter that I didn't have. Doing it one day at a time sober. You know, I always share when I go to treatment centers, and unfortunately with this disease, it gets worse before it gets better. But if getting clean and sober was easy, guess what? I wouldn't be here, and neither would you. So we talk about this, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the principle behind step 2 is hope. It was through coming through meetings, and this is my home group. I used to come to 3 meetings a day. I came to the 6:30 a.m., I came to the noon, and I came to the 6:30 at night. I did 274 meetings my first 90 days, and I was batshit crazy. Crazier than I was before I went into treatment. But I wasn't drinking one day at a time. But through that hope and hearing other people's experiences and believing in a power greater than themselves could restore them to sanity, I started having a little hope. And through that process, it says in the big book, it says if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to get one sober, we'd have been sober long ago. I had a degree in engineering. I was a pretty smart guy. I guess, when I'm looking at myself and my morals, right? I thought I was pretty moral, but you know what? I mean, if you ask my wife and my daughter and my employer, they said, tell you I was very immoral. But that's me thinking, right? And unfortunately, half of my mind manufactures bullshit and the other half buys it, right? So it really sounds really good up here in my head. So then we moved on to step 3, which is based around faith, and hope leads to faith. And so this was a really struggling process for me. It's made a decision to turn my will and my life over to care of God as I understood Him. And my sponsor, who I called every day as he asked me to do. I met him every Thursday, and we started working these steps. And this struggle I had with making a decision to turn my thinking and my actions over to a care of God as I understood Him was very difficult. And I think through the process, it's harder with the ones that are closest to us. For my relationship with my wife wasn't changing. And so my sponsor used to tell me, don't always believe what you're thinking, and quit acting on your feelings. For every thought isn't the truth, and every feeling isn't a fact. And if doing the right thing hurts, it means you're growing. I'm like, sobriety sucks, man. It really does. But through this process, he used to tell me, if nothing changes, nothing changes. If you continue to do it, it's not old behavior. And in the big book, I love it. So it says, lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. And then my favorite line in the book is, well, where and how are we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself that will solve your problem. When I walked in these rooms, I was raised Catholic. I went to parochial schools. Religion was rigid to me. It was beat into me by nuns with paddles. I mean, I wasn't the best student when it came to showing up to school. And through this process, I always believed I was a part of God's team. I just chose not to be a team player. That self-will run riot they talk about in the big book. I love it. So if you're new, these things may seem Greek, but I can assure you this. It says in the big book on page 62, it says selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows, and they retaliate. So our troubles are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is self-will run riot, even though he doesn't think so. It goes on to say this. It says, we must rid this selfishness. We must, or it will kill us. So through this process, very slow and painful. So I'd come home from the office, And I'd walk in the door, and all I could hear was yak, 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 yak. My wife would approach me, and I couldn't really hear it because of the noise in my head. And I would react. So when I get home and I'm, 3 months, I'm not sleeping in a bed with my wife. The couch was better. Matter of fact, I was below the dog. And my sponsor would tell me, he goes, I'd call him up and he goes, she's doing it again. And you go, Rich, she's not doing it to you. She's just doing it. And he goes, why do you, he would share with me, he goes, Rich, do you ever think that maybe she doesn't want your opinion? Do you ever think that maybe she just had a bad day and wants to vent? Have you ever thought about just shutting the hell up? And so we instilled this little process, which was kind of funny. So he says, when your wife approaches you and you start getting frustrated, just say, Kathy, wait, I need to go process this. And I would go outside, smoke a cigarette, and think how I was going to respond. And then she's going like, what the hell has this process stuff got to do with anything? This is what was suggested by my sponsor. It was easier than, calling her what I used to call her. And I'm going to share you through this process. At 4 months, my wife came to me and said, Rich, just go drink because you're an asshole sober. I don't know what was going on in my life, but like I said, I picked up this side effects of restless, irritable, and discontent. I don't know what was worse, drinking against my own will or waking up in the morning and thinking about drinking all day and not drinking. It was kicking my ass. A lot of times patients at treatment centers say, did you have any triggers when you quit drinking? I go, yeah, breathing. If I was breathing, I was thinking about it. And it says in there, it talks about the obsession, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And I'll share with you that, because I fought that obsession to drink and use for 7 months. But about month 5, I started, my sponsor started suggesting is when you go in the house and she starts her process, why don't you just say, Kathy, is there anything I can do to make it better? Is there anything I can do to help you? So one day I tried it. I went in the house and she said, Rich, will you help me hang some blinds? I said, sure I will, Kathy. And she damn near fell over. But I can tell you the thing, is she cooked me dinner for the first time. I call my sponsor and go, man, this shit's working. Keep on giving me the good stuff, man, So little by slow, day by day. I love in the 3rd step prayer. So my prayers in the morning look like this. It says, God, I offer myself to you. Do with me as you would have me do. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Take away the things in me that stop me from helping others. That includes my wife and my kid. So through this process, as I shared with you, I remember I walked into, we started doing the 4th step, right? So it says, made a fearless and moral inventory of ourselves. For my sponsor shared that you're only as sick as your secrets. I was all excited about that because there's resentments, right? And I'm like, all right, I get to write down all the things that people have done to me and screwed me over. Wrote down a bunch of my fears, my sex conduct. And through this process, it talks about a fact-finding and a fact-facing mission. It's about getting rid of damaged goods. And through this process, I started writing down all the things that I'd done. It was places, principles, and institutions. So I had some principles I always like to share. My dad used to share with me all the time. He says, Rich, champagne tastes on a beer budget. He used to piss me off. Under my roof, under my rules. Ugh. It used to drive me crazy. Then I had my wife and, my daughter, my employer, the IRS, the police department, of course, and all the people that I felt that had screwed me over through life. And then I went to... We went to an IHOP and says, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. So I sat down with my sponsor at an IHOP in Allen, and we started walking through this process of sharing my resentments on my 4th step. And it went very well until we got to the 4th column, when he started pointing out and trying to share with me what part I played in these situations. In the beginning, it was just like It ebbs and flows. It was a tug and tat kind of a thing, I'm like, well, I really didn't have that much to play in that piece, But he started sharing his experience, strength, and hope with me on a lot of things that he did that I did. And I noticed that even working with sponsees today. And pointing out where I had been dishonest, where I'd been a liar, where I'd been a cheat. Where I made a decision based on self. So all the decisions I based on self were the basis around me going to take a drink. Because once I made that selfish decision, I put everybody else at arm's length. And so we walked through this process. And I don't know what happened, but we get done with the fifth step. And I'm walking out in the parking lot. And, I'm sitting in my car. And, it says on 6 and 7, it says, we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And we're supposed to go home and get quiet and revisit the first 5 proposals. And I had this inkling. It's like, you know what? I'm going to go over to St. Jude's Church over on Highway 5. I'm going to do my 6 and 7 step there. So I walked into the church. Nobody's in there. I've been to a Catholic church in 25 years. I had all my stuff sprawled out in the pew. I'm down and I'm praying and I'm doing what the book instructs me to do. And I hear this little pitter patter of footsteps, and I look up and there's this little nun about 4 foot tall standing in front of me. She's like, "Sir, can I help you? What are you doing?" And I shared with her what I was doing, and she said, "Well, here's the deal." And she says, "Why don't I do this? I'll go into the chapel and I'll say a prayer for you." And I'm like, whew, golden. How sweet is that? So I finished the 6th step and, did the 7th. And I love in the 7th step, it says, "My Creator, I'm now willing that you have all of me, good and bad." Because you know what? I'm not all good and I'm not all bad. It's through this process that I've become better. I'm no means where I need to be, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. So I actually went into the chapel, and it was the day of confession. So I have this novice idea. I'm like, I had an affair on my wife. And so even still sharing that with my sponsor, there was still weighing heavy on my heart. So I'm like, you know what? Here's what a good Catholic boy does. So I went in and I went into confession. And so I went to confession every week as a kid, right? It's just something we had to do. And I remember Father John always telling me, he's like, when we go to confession, he's like, Rich, that's the same stuff you told me last week. Over and over and over. And it's funny that he's like, if nothing changes, nothing changes. It's funny how I started hearing these things later in life, And I'll share this. I remember when I was in 7th grade, I had got caught with some illegal substance in junior high at school. And I came home, and my dad asked me, he goes, Rich, do you believe in God? And I'm like, sure I do, Dad. And he goes, why don't you act like it? And that still resonates today. But anyways, I went into the confession, I shared with this priest. I started sharing him why I was there. I shared with him about my unfaithfulness to my wife. And at one point in time, he interrupted me, and he says, you know what? I think we should set up an appointment. And I says, you know what? I think I'm okay. Why don't you just give me my penance and I'll go? I didn't need an appointment. I just needed to share that. So he gave me my penance. I went out, lit a candle, did the thing a Catholic guy does, and I walked out. So I can share with you this. The weight of the world wasn't lifted from my shoulders at that point in time. But I can show you with one thing, man. All the secrets that I had were gone. They had been shared. Pain shared, pain lessened. Again, you're only as sick as your secrets. So I share with my sponsees today that my sponsor knows more about me than any person on earth, except, of course, God. So then we made a list of all people we'd harm and became willing to make amends to them all. In that process, on my resentment, let me figure my 4th step one more time. So on my resentment, my sponsor had me write down myself. And why I want to share that with you, because this resentment was the hardest one to let go. It wasn't necessarily, it was because my wife and child, they're like, Dad, you lost the house, you lost the cars. We used to have a pool. We had all this stuff. And all because you drank, and did what you did. We don't have it anymore. And I heard that for a really long time. And so I carried that internally, as a resentment against myself. And, it's sometimes I'll even go into morbid reflection and go, man, I'm 57 years old and I'm still working. Just think if I wouldn't have done that. But, my sponsor said a most amazing thing to me. He said, Rich, you had to go through everything you went through and do everything you did to get to where you are today. And today, I can grab onto that and hold on to that today. Because I can assure you this, if my wife and daughter were here today, they would tell you that all those material things mean nothing. But having a sober dad and a sober husband mean everything. And it's just a process. So the amends process, right, is made a list. So, of course, my wife, my daughter, my parents, my employer. All of them went fairly easy and are living amends today. I didn't make amends to my parents until I was 4.5 years sober because I didn't see them until after I was 4.5 years sober. I had one amends with a gentleman that was at a very large top 100 Fortune company that me and him got crossways, and I twice attempted to make amends to him, and he denied me of that. My sponsor said, let it go. But the amends that kicked my butt were the financial amends. So like I said, even though I quit drinking, my life seemed to get worse. I served 2 warrants sober. It's funny, I was going to do those. Those were going to be on my 9th step, on my amends. But unfortunately, in about 5 months, I'm driving a car. As a good alcoholic, I don't have insurance. I don't have an inspection sticker up to date and all that stuff. So I get pulled over, go and get dog food with my daughter, and click, click, there I go, right in front of my daughter. I remember they took me to the Richardson jail. I did 247 serenity prayers to the McKinney jail in shackles in an orange suit. And I take meetings to jails today. And so I made one small mistake, and I didn't actually probably get my sponsor involved as much as I thought. But I'm like, I'm 6 months sober. I need to start getting my credit going. So I reached out to this credit service to assist me with this process. Now, granted, I didn't do taxes in 2008 and 2009. It was a huge mistake because every person that I owed money to now knew where I was and how to get a hold of me, which wasn't a good idea. So I spent a lot of time talking to my sponsor and calling credit card companies and the IRS and all these financial institutions, explaining my situation, which sometimes they want to hear, some don't give a shit about. They just want their money. But through the process and staying sober one day at a time, in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I finished my financial amends this year, which is amazing. Because I remember sitting in that corner, and these people are sharing about how they had got through all this. And I'm like, there's no way in hell I'll ever pay everything I owe alive. It was just so much that I couldn't even see it. But little by slow, day by day, things started getting better. I shared with you that the obsession wasn't lifted for me for 7 months. I did my 5th step at 7 months. In the big book, it shares this. The feeling of the drink problem will disappear, will come strongly, right after step 5. That's my experience. Because I remember in sobriety earlier, I told my sponsor, I'm going to all these meetings. And nobody's asking me to be their sponsor. And he's like, you can't truly give away what you haven't got. You're sick, and nobody wants that. And through this process, I made my financial amends. I started that process. And it goes into step 10. I loved it. It's continue to take personal inventory. When we're wrong, promptly admitted it. For if after step 9 it says, if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. We'll know a new freedom and a new happiness. The 9th step promises. So Mark's here, so I'm going to share a little story that just brought it up. So I remember when I used to come here on the drug buggy, I call it. So I spent 31 days in this fine resort in Princeton, Texas, and every once in a while at nighttime they would all load us up in a drug buggy, and they'd bring us to meetings. And Mark, I just caught it. You caught my eye there. I was going to share this. So I'm over here, and I used to bring a spiral notebook with me. And it was the most amazing thing. I journaled my first 570-some meetings. But I'm writing down in this little notebook all the promises from off the wall. And after the meeting, Mark came up to me and goes, you know, this is on page 83 and 84. I'm like, fuck you. You know what I mean? Like, son of a bitch. I just got done writing them all down. You know what I mean? I wasn't that far into the steps when I was from treatment, right? So, but it was an amazing thing, right? It says we not regret the past and we should shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. I love what the other promises says we don't truly know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. It's my favorite one. But in step 10 it says, our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness, for this is not an overnight matter. It must be continued to be worked for a lifetime. I must continue to look for selfishness, dishonesty, and fear. When these arise, I ask God to remove them. I place a phone call my sponsor, call another alcoholic. If I'd harmed anybody, I immediately make amends. And then the one that has had the biggest impact on me is I resolutely turn to others that I can help. Those are like the ABCs that I use today. I try to share with God is do not allow these thoughts to come out and be these words. Right? My sponsor said, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your destiny. So I've been in several meetings, even this year, where I'm like, God, just please don't allow these thoughts to come out of this mouth. You know, and then resolutely turn to others that can help. You know, it says in the forward of the third edition, it says, despite the size and increase of this fellowship, at its core it remains simple and personal. For recovery begins when one alcoholic shares with another his experience, strength, and hope. You know, if it wasn't for this family, I don't know where I'd be today. I probably wouldn't be here today. You know, I was, contemplating taking my life before I went into treatment. It just seemed like the easiest thing to do. You know, today through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I have a life better than I deserve. So, going on forward, fast forward, I remember we were just talking about chips earlier. So I remember I get my 1 month chip, which, they say 1 month, 1,000 nights. I don't know. I mean, I share in the treatment centers that one day felt like a week felt like a month felt like a year. I felt like I was in there a year. And then, 30 days, 60 days, and then, then you got to wait 9 months. So my most gratifying chip is my 9-month chip because I was still fighting an obsession at 7 months. I'll share a little story about Odaat. So I remember I got out in August, and in December they started hanging these stockings. And I was still battling the disease of restless, irritable, and discontent. And I remember calling my sponsor, Jim. I go, I'm going to burn that place down. These guys are way too happy for me. And he shares that a lot when he tells us, we go out and share the message. Because I couldn't figure out why it was taking me so long. And so at 9 months, like I said, it was gratifying. But I remember I got my 1-year chip here. He came up here and gave me my chip, and I was so damn happy. And when I got up here, he whispered in my ear, and he says, Rich, that chip's not for you. I'm like, damn. He's like, that's for all the people in this room to show that the program really works. And that's what it means today. It's not about me. It's about you. So those of you that are new, keep coming back. This program has given me a life better than I deserve. So step 11 says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him. I'll share with you this. The only constant in my spirituality is inconsistent because it's always changing. The more you seek, the more you find. Some days I'm deep into it, and other days I feel like I'm just barely scratching the surface. For I understand this today, I love definitions. So spirituality is the inner path of oneself and the deepest values and meaning by which one lives. In AA terms, it means doing the right next thing. I struggle with that. It's just doing the right next thing. Spirituality is action. Mark Turner always says, continue to take their inventory. When they're wrong, promptly tell them. It's looking at what I'm doing today. It's not what you're doing. I'm not in control. I always love in Alcoholics Anonymous when the newcomer comes in and he's complaining about traffic. And I've been pulled over twice and ticketed for road rage in my days prior to coming into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And today I just let them in. I just get in the lane and go. Just go with the flow. I hear a lot of times in the rooms, just buy a ticket and ride the ride. A lot of times I wanted to try to do it my way. And every time I take a hold of the wheel, things go awry. So it's funny. So there's another gentleman in the early morning meeting. So I go through this process, and through the years, one day at a time, days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months turn into years. And today I notice this as I go to bed a spiritual giant and I wake up agnostic. I'm not sure what happens when I go to sleep, but when I wake up, man, I'm just an alcoholic. So I have to start my day over. And how I did that was by placing strategic post notes in areas of my life where it needed to be. So I had one on my mirror that says, get on your knees. I had one in my car that says, you're not in control. I had one in my office on my computer that said, shut up and listen. And through this process, repetition strengthens and confirms. Today, my processes are the same. It's just the same over. The words are different. My conversations are different. But I get up in the morning, I go to the restroom, I grab a Keurig cup, I go in my garage, I open the garage door, and it's like, what's up, God? Who do we help today? And I've had the ability, and be in this program, to sponsor a lot of gentlemen. Man, what a blessing that is. And I remember at 3 years of sobriety, I lost a sponsee to this disease. And I told my sponsor that I wasn't going to do this anymore. I wasn't going to sponsor guys. I'd worked with this guy, and he struggled with step 3, and he went into an alcohol coma for 30 days, and he managed to live. We got out, we started working the steps again, and he drank again. And I got a call from his mother, said he's in Baylor, and I went down there, and she says, doctor came up to me and said he's not going to make it. He's going to die. He's probably got a couple days. I remember walking in this guy's room, and it was just like when I went to put my dog down. I went to take my dog to the vet to put him down. He was 18 years old. And the damn dog jumped right out of the truck like nothing was, I'm like, and it was just like this last thing of impulse. But I walked in the room, and the guy's like, hey, Rich, I'm ready to work the steps. I got baptized that day and died 2 days later. Through this process, as you well know, if you come in these rooms long enough, you'll build some friendships and you'll meet a lot of people that lose their lives and take their lives. But, my sponsees are just amazing. It's funny how I always share that, it takes all of us. It takes some of us to do it the right way, some of us to do it the wrong way, and some have to die. I've sponsored a lot of guys. There's a lot of guys here that I sponsored that are sober today, which is amazing. I actually gave away, last month I gave 4 one-year chips. That was like, wow. That was amazing. But also, was at do a lot of treatment center work, and there was a young man that hung himself at the treatment center last week that guy go to, in his 20s. I'm not sure, why God graced me with this gift. But in the book it says willingness and action. I was willing. You know, it's funny when my mom, you know, it's like my mom started this whole process, and I share that with her, and she goes, well, I was telling the truth. You know, and Steve, that does a lot of treatment centers work with me, says, you know, you'll know in your heart when you had enough. You know, I just had enough. I just didn't want to battle this thing anymore. You know, and I came in here in the fellowship, in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you guys love me until I can learn to love myself. You stood by me. Through good and bad. A lot of bad before good. You know, and then it goes on to step 12. It says, haven't had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We try to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. As I shared, I'm not perfect at this. I have good days and bad days. You know, the disease still centers in the mind. You know, I share this as, you know, God's not going to do for me what I can do for myself. So if you're new, just stop drinking. Put the plug in the jug, as an old-timer would say. Work the 12 steps, and you know what God does? He removes the obsession. I don't think about it today. It's not even a process. But as Fred says, Fred will walk in these rooms and says, you know what? I've got 36 years of physical sobriety and about 5 minutes of emotional sobriety. That's what it's about today. It isn't about the drink. It's about serenity. And serenity is not freedom from the storm. It's finding peace within the storm. With all the things that are going on in life today, everything's not going to be perfect. But it's the ability to find peace within that storm. And how I do that is by coming in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can share what's going on with me. I call it the room of bobbleheads. I can share my most tragic situation. Everybody's going, yep, I get it, I get it, I get it, I get it, I get it. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. You know? We're here to help each other. You know, it's the road to recovery is long. You know, but the distance of the ditch is right here. You know, I always worry about my enthusiasm or my passion for this thing will ever go away. I mean, today at almost 8 years, you know, I'm still as passionate about it as ever. You know, my neighbor got sober in December of 1962. I always ask him when I have newcomers, you know, they always say, well, why does he keep going to meetings? And he always says, you know, because I want to continue to stay sober. Because the world record for sobriety is 24 hours. All I have is today. That's it. It's not based on what happened yesterday. It's about today. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful you're all here and helping me stay sober today. That's all I have. Thanks. Yep.